Hello guys, here's our fourth video and our final one. So let's go ahead and do our last equation together, r equals 1 minus 2 cosine theta. But as I'm doing this, I realize that I actually did sine theta, so let's go ahead and change that to sine theta, just for ease on my end because I have everything ready to go. So in rectangular form, you're graphing y equals 1 minus 2 sine x, which then looks like this. So let me change this as well, sine x, right? So the idea is the same. It doesn't matter if we do cosine or sine. In fact, you should try then 1 minus 2 cosine theta. But I've gone ahead and graphed it in rectangular form from 0 to 2 pi. So we have our 5 key points here, right? However, what's different about this is that we have these 2 extra points where we have a radius of 0. So we actually want to highlight those as well. We don't just want to have these 5 key points as we're starting. So let's go ahead and make sure that all of those points are highlighted here. In fact, let me just make sure my next slide has everything. I also want to put, for your reference here, the radian values and those actual key points. It'll just be easier for us to navigate back and forth. Notice I didn't put the points in red here. I did that on purpose, although we're going to be able to figure out what those are. I don't actually need those exact radian values. I can still get an idea of what this is. So let's go ahead and start plotting just as we did before. Our maximum is 3, our minimum is 1 or negative 1. So I have 3 rings here, and then I just have my points on the side for ease. So our first one's going to be 0, 1, right? And so a radius of 1 at 0 radians. So let's go ahead and plot that. 0 radians and a radius of 1, right? So there it is. Okay, let's make sure that gets up there a little bit. Okay, and our second key value is actually this 0 radians, right? So, I'm sorry, 0 radius. So this is pi over 2 negative 1. I'm going to hold off on that and do this red one first. Now, what is that one? It's somewhere between 0 and pi over 2, right? Between 0 and pi over 2. Now, I happen to know it looks to me like it's closer to this than it is over here, right? So it's closer to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that that's approximately pi over 6. And for our graph here, I'm going to draw in a line so I can see that boundary. Now, it doesn't actually matter if it's pi over 6, but I want to just connect that so I can see the region that I'm looking at. Do you see that right there, how it's in blue? And so between 0 and then some angle in here, and I just made it pi over 6. I know it's not pi over 4. It could be a little bit less. That I'm actually looking at this radian measure, and I want there to be a 0 radius there, but what's important about that is how we draw our picture. So we want to draw this smooth curve in here, right? We have to connect those values because this radius decreases. So let's go back over to our shape and get our connector line here. And so what happens is this radians gets smaller, 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 so we're actually drawing this smooth curve right in there. Do you see that? Now we can change that color there easily. I'm not sure if I can easily do that right now. Format shape and just make that first part at least black for you. So let's go ahead and do that. So that kind of highlights. You see that first little loop? Okay. Now we're going from this value to pi over 2 negative 1. So pi over 2 negative 1, well here's pi over 2, but a radius of negative 1 means down here, right? So let's go ahead and plot that point over here on a radius of 1. Which is negative 1 for pi over 2, right? Now, what's happening between this value and pi over 2? The radius is actually getting bigger, right? But it's in the negative direction. So between here and pi over 2, that's this angle right in here. That's these values. But we actually want the ones that are negative. So we want the vertical angle to that, or the vertical angle is down in here. So our loop is going to be right in here. Let's go ahead and draw that in. So our loop is going to be right in here in the vertical angle region. How come? Because we want that to be in the opposite quadrant because it's negative. So let me click off that, right? So between this value and pi over 2, that's this angle area in here. But since we want the negative radius, we're flipped into the vertical angle down here and we connect our loop. Okay, that's the toughest part here. Now here we are back over here at pi over 2 to this value in here, which means, again, we are looping back around. Now, notice there's symmetry here. So let's go ahead and draw a line that's like our bow tie that matches this. So because there's symmetry, that's pi over 6. Why don't I go ahead and draw another one over here? That's at 5 pi over 6 because I chose that to be the angle that I could see easily, right? So what does that mean between this value and that 5 pi over 6, if you will? These are negative. So normally we're in this quadrant over here, but since it's negative, we want the opposite vertical angle. So I'm sorry, we're up here. We want the opposite vertical angle, which is down here. So let's go ahead and loop that around. I'm going to stay with blue now just for timing on here. The video has to be a little shorter. So we're going to loop it around here. And there's the next part, right? And now we're going from this angle to pi comma 1. So pi radians and a measure of 1. So we hopefully start to see this little loop-de-loop coming around here. We're going to continue this. We have the positive values, so we're going to be in this region here. Let's go ahead and draw that in there. So we're starting from the center and we're going over here, right? So we see sort of this loop right here all the way around. And now this hopefully gets a little easier. They're all positive values. So 3 pi over 2 is 3. 3 pi over 2 is 3. That's down over here. We're going to put that in right there. And we'll continue to connect. These are all positive values, positive radiuses that increase between pi and 3 pi over 2. So we're going to connect that region right in there. And then hopefully you can see that last part gets nicely looped back around. So we're just making a nice big loop right in there. Okay. And we see this last region right in here between 3 pi over 2 and 2 pi, that radius gets smaller. Now there's my sort of sketchy graph, right? Go ahead and see that on Desmos. And here it is, the nice loop-de-loop. Of course, your curves are going to look better than mine. Again, the key part here and the tricky part is we have these zeros. So we have this sort of loop that happens in the middle here, which makes it harder. But if we understand the foundation of how to connect everything and whether it's positive or negative radius, then we can hopefully get that sketch nicely. Okay, so that wraps it up, folks. You should get a worksheet in class today, and hopefully you can complete that for homework, and we will come in tomorrow and answer any questions. Thank you, and have a good day, guys. Bye-bye.